And joining us from the campaign trail in Michigan, Democratic presidential candidate and Senator Bernie Sanders. Senator, since Super Tuesday, you've been going after Joe Biden pretty hard on a number of issues. Take a look.
One of us in this race led the opposition to the war in Iraq. One of us led the opposition to disastrous trade agreements. One of us has spent his entire life fighting against cuts in Social Security.
Senator, now that this is a two-man race and you're going to have a two-man debate next Sunday, how hard do you go after Joe Biden without carving each other up and helping Donald Trump win re-election?
Well, Chris, that's the right question. Joe Biden is a friend of mine. Joe Biden is a decent guy. What Joe has said is if I win the nomination, he'll be there for me. And what I have said, if he wins the nomination, I'll be there for him, because we both recognize that we have a president who is a pathological liar, and I say that without any joy in my heart. Somebody who's running a corrupt administration, and somebody apparently who has never read the Constitution of the United States and thinks he's above the law. So Biden and I, no matter who wins this thing, will be together in defeating Trump. But now that it is a two-way race, it is important for the voters of this country to ask themselves two questions. Number one, which candidate is stronger in terms of being able to defeat Trump? And number two, what are the differences in a record? Joe has been in Washington for a long time, as have I. And my point is, when people see the records, Joe voted for the war in Iraq, I opposed the war in Iraq. Joe voted for the Wall Street bailout, I vigorously opposed the Wall Street bailout. When you go to the Midwest, we're in Michigan right now, you go to Wisconsin, you go to Pennsylvania, people want to know about your views on trade. Because disastrous trade agreements like NAFTA and PNTR with China cost this country over 4 million good-paying jobs, decimated communities here in Michigan. I helped lead the opposition to those trade agreements. Joe voted for them.
Senator, Joe Biden is also going after you, and here he is on who is better able to help working Americans. Take a look.
Now let's go to Michigan, Bernie, and see if that's true. I'm the guy that helped bail out the automobile industry. What'd you do, old buddy? Come on.
He says you got big plans, he gets results.
Well, I think in terms of results, when you support the disastrous war in Iraq, when you support the Wall Street bailout, when you just support terrible trade agreements.
But how about the auto bailout, sir?
Well, the auto bailout was done by the Obama administration, and it was a step forward. But I think sometimes Joe is taking a little bit of credit as vice president for initiatives that were led by President Obama and by many members of the Congress.
Let's take a look at the practical politics here. The big prize on Tuesday, or the biggest prize, is Michigan with 125 delegates. You scored a major upset win there in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. But on Super Tuesday, you lost to Biden among what many people would think would be your base, white working-class voters in a number of states. And Biden taunted you on your lack of support among some other groups. Here he is.
It's ridiculous. Bernie, you got beaten by overwhelming support I have from the African-American community, Bernie. You got beaten because of suburban women, Bernie.
If you were to lose in the first industrial Midwest state to vote, Michigan, on Tuesday, how serious is that? How damaging, and would you consider dropping out?
Well, no, I certainly would not consider dropping out. You know, Chris, media asked you, is this state or that state life or death? I was asked that in Iowa, I was asked that in New Hampshire. We won California, the largest state in this country. We are winning among Latino voters big time. We are winning among young people. You know, when you talk about the future of this country or the future of the Democratic Party, one might want to look where young people are at. And what young people are saying is that we have got to move aggressively to make sure that health care is a right for all. Young people want to raise that minimum wage to at least $15 an hour. Young people want us to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure and build the affordable housing that we need. And by the way, young people understand that we have massive levels of income and wealth inequality, where 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of America. They want changes. They're concerned about climate change. They're concerned about racism and sexism. So I think if you look at the general electorate, you look at the future of this country, I think you got a lot of energy behind us. Just yesterday, Chris, just yesterday, didn't get a lot of media attention for whatever reason. We held a rally in Grant Park in Chicago. We had 15,000 people out. So I'm feeling good about the momentum that we have. I think we're going to do well on Tuesday, and I think we're going to beat Biden.
I beat Biden in Michigan?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think the polling, you know, last time around, as you indicated, it was seen as a big upset.
Right.
Because polling had us down literally by 20 points one day before the election.
Okay. You talked in your last answer about income inequality, and I want to press down on that with you. Here's something that you said last fall. I don't think billionaires should exist. First of all, a few billionaires, let's talk about. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos have created more than 1 million jobs, probably more than 1 million extra in terms of fallout as it goes from their companies, and created trillions of dollars of wealth. Why shouldn't they share in the wealth that they create, which is helping not just them, but has helped a lot of Americans?
Chris, I have nothing personal against any billionaire. But when you are looking at economy, and an economy today where the top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 92%, where over the last 30 years, the top 1% has seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth, while the bottom half of America has actually seen a decline, where real wages have essentially been stagnant for the last 45 years. Workers in America not making a nickel more in real dollars than they did 45 years ago. When you got 500,000 people sleeping out on the streets of America tonight, homeless, when the very, very rich are getting richer, when you got half of our people living paycheck to paycheck, 87 million people uninsured or underinsured, 45 million people dealing with student debt, young people can't afford to go to college. I'm in Michigan now, go to Detroit. You got a school district there which is inadequately funded. So we got to get our priorities right. That's what we have to do.
Two questions. First of all, let's just take the case of Bill Gates. He created a whole new way for people to get information, to discuss, to communicate with each other. Huge increase in the way we live now. It's unimaginable not to have Microsoft and the various things that it created.
And he deserves great credit for that, Chris.
First of all, so let me just say this. One, he's created a great economy. He's giving away billions of dollars. Some could argue he's done a lot more with his wealth than any politician would. And which is one question. And the other is, how far would you go as a democratic socialist in terms of worker control of businesses?
Good. Well, two questions. No one is denigrating the achievements of Bill Gates or anybody else. But we have to look at culturally what's going on. Do people like the Walton family, for example, that own Walmart, they're worth well over $100 billion when their workers are making $11 or $12 an hour. No one is denigrating people who have made significant achievements, but enough really is enough. Does Mike Bloomberg really need $65 billion to see his wealth increase by $15 billion in the last 3 years?
What would you do about worker control?
No one begrudges. Well, in terms of worker control, I believe it is important to put workers on the boards of directors of major corporations, and I'll tell you why. When you do that, corporations are not going to be so quick to shut down in America and move to China, move to Mexico, and to move to other low-wage countries. I want working people to say, you know what, I'm in a job, my ideas matter. I'm just not a cog in a machine. And in Vermont, by the way, and in states all over this country where you have enterprises where workers do have significant input into what goes on, absenteeism goes down, productivity goes up. Democracy, to me, means not just voting every 4 years, having a bit of a say in the job that you're working at. I like that idea.
I got two more questions I want to try to squeeze in here, sir. There's been a lot of talk recently about your support for certain aspects, and I emphasize that, aspects of Castro's Cuba. There's a story that came out this week that back in 2014, you were part of a congressional delegation that went to Cuba, and that you met with an American political prisoner there named Alan Gross, and he says this is the conversation the two of you had.
He said, quote, "I don't know what's so wrong with this country." How could he be so insensitive to make that remark to a political hostage? Me?
Senator, did you say that to an American political prisoner in Cuba?
I remember that trip. I remember that trip very well, and I remember the terrible conditions that Mr. Gross lived in. His teeth were rotting. I did not make that statement. Why Mr. Gross is saying that, I have no idea, but I did not make that statement. Look, Cuba is an authoritarian country. Saudi Arabia is an authoritarian country. And Chris, if you check my record, I happen to be maybe old-fashioned, not like Donald Trump. I don't think Putin is a nice guy. I don't think Kim Jong-un of North Korea is a nice guy. I speak out for democracy all over the world, whether it is in Cuba, whether it's in Saudi Arabia, whether it's in Russia, wherever it is.
Finally, there was a fascinating profile of you in the New York Times. I don't know if you got a chance to read it yesterday. It said that when you're in hotels, you want a room which is far away from the ice machines and the elevators, which I have to tell you, I think is perfectly sensible. It also said that you want your room to be at 60 degrees. And the question I have, sir, is when you're on the road, do you hang meat in your room?
I'll tell you, maybe it's having lived in Vermont for the last 50 years. I just don't sleep well when the room gets very, very warm. And my poor wife has been having to deal with that for decades now. So and sometimes at hotels in the night, they turn off the air conditioner, it gets pretty hot, and I don't sleep, and we're on the road a whole lot. But I have to confess, I admit it, I do like cold rooms.
And in 15 seconds, it also said that you like to watch old boxing matches on TV. Who's your favorite fighter, sir?
I would go with Muhammad Ali, who was not only a great fighter, one of the great heavyweight champs of all time, but was an extraordinary human being and was probably the most loved athlete of his time.
You think he could have beaten Joe Louis?
Yeah, I do.
Senator Sanders, thank you. Thanks for your Incidentally, Joe Louis was from Michigan. You're going to be in trouble on that one.
And by the way, I know, I just met, it turns out that Chokwe Lumumba, who is the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, is campaigning for me in Michigan. Turns out his family is related directly to Joe Louis, whose real name was Joseph Barrows. Barrows family. That's here true. In Michigan.
You got some political repair work to do this afternoon. Senator, thank you. Thanks for your time on this busy weekend. Safe travels on the campaign trail, sir.
Thank you very much, Chris.